Across ancient civilizations separated by oceans, languages, and thousands of years, one figure appears with extraordinary consistency: the giant. Whether carved into stone, written into sacred texts, or preserved through oral traditions, giants occupy a place in global history that is far too widespread to dismiss as coincidence. Their presence lingers like a shadow cast across time, challenging the boundaries between mythology and reality. Greek poets describe towering beings who battled the Olympian gods for control of the world. Hebrew scriptures reference the Nephilim, beings so imposing that entire nations trembled at the stories of their height and strength. Norse sagas spoke of the Jotnar, primeval figures who shaped mountains and landscapes long before the age of humans. Indigenous peoples of North America passed down stories of colossal warriors, red-haired tribes, and battles against beings whose stature defied explanation. In South America, early chroniclers documented legends of giant visitors who emerged from the sea and terrified local populations with their immense size and appetite. When cultures with no contact produce similar legends, historians must ask why. Either early humans shared a psychological need to imagine beings larger and stronger than themselves, or these stories emerged from encounters with individuals who truly possessed extraordinary size. Mythology often embellishes, but it rarely arises from nothing. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, American newspapers reported an unusual number of discoveries: oversized skulls, long bones far larger than any typical humans, and skeletons measuring 7 to 9 feet tall. Farmers, miners, and early archaeologists claimed to uncover burial mounds containing individuals of astonishing height. Many of these finds were reportedly handed over to institutions, cataloged briefly, and then lost to time. Some of these claims were likely exaggerated, but others came from reputable excavation teams whose notes still exist. Before assuming these accounts prove the existence of giants, it is important to investigate them with discipline and evidence. Some finds were misidentified remains of animals. Some were tall but within the known range of human variation. Yet the sheer volume of these reports, combined with humanity's collective memory of giant-like beings, raises genuine questions. Were these anomalies simply outliers of natural human growth, or do they point to something more significant, a chapter of history that remains obscured? To uncover the truth, we must move beyond legend and examine what archaeology actually reveals. Across ancient civilizations separated by oceans, languages, and thousands of years, one figure appears with extraordinary consistency: the giant. Whether carved into stone, written into sacred texts, or preserved through oral traditions, giants occupy a place in global history that is far too widespread to dismiss as coincidence. Their presence lingers like a shadow cast across time, challenging the boundaries between mythology and reality. Greek poets described towering beings who battled the Olympian gods for control of the world. Hebrew scriptures reference the Nephilim, beings so imposing that entire nations trembled at the stories of their height and strength. Norse sagas spoke of the Jotnar, primeval figures who shaped mountains and landscapes long before the age of humans. Indigenous peoples of North America passed down stories of colossal warriors, red-haired tribes, and battles against beings whose stature defied explanation. In South America, early chroniclers documented legends of giant visitors who emerged from the sea and terrified local populations with their immense size and appetite. When cultures with no contact produce similar legends, historians must ask why. Either early humans shared a psychological need to imagine beings larger and stronger than themselves, or these stories emerge from encounters with individuals who truly possessed extraordinary size. Mythology often embellishes, but it rarely arises from nothing. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, American newspapers reported an unusual number of discoveries: oversized skulls, long bones far larger than any typical humans, and skeletons measuring 7 to 9 feet tall. Farmers, miners, and early archaeologists claimed to uncover burial mounds containing individuals of astonishing height. Many of these finds were reportedly handed over to institutions, cataloged briefly, and then lost to time. Some of these claims were likely exaggerated, but others came from reputable excavation teams whose notes still exist. Before assuming these accounts prove the existence of giants, it is important to investigate them with discipline and evidence. Some finds were misidentified remains of animals. Some were tall but within the known range of human variation. Yet the sheer volume of these reports, combined with humanity's collective memory of giant-like beings, raises genuine questions. Were these anomalies simply outliers of natural human growth, or do they point to something more significant, a chapter of history that remains obscured? To uncover the truth, we must move beyond legend and examine what archaeology actually reveals. When the 19th century opened the door to large-scale excavation throughout the United States, something unexpected began appearing in newspapers, scientific journals, and field notes. Reports of skeletal remains far taller than the average human. These discoveries were not confined to a single region. They appeared from New York to Minnesota, from Ohio's mound complexes to the plains of the Midwest. For decades, American readers encountered headlines describing skeletons measuring 7, 8, even 9 feet in length. While many of these reports were sensationalized by newspapers hungry for striking stories, others came from documented archaeological expeditions and were written in sober, technical language. The earliest and most frequently cited sources come from the investigations of the ancient burial mounds scattered across the Ohio River Valley. These mounds, built by cultures predating the arrival of European settlers, contained thousands of burials. Excavators occasionally noted unusually long femurs, or large skulls, with proportions that did not match typical measurements. A handful of reports described individuals so tall that even cautious archaeologists struggled to explain the dimensions. Some skeletons were found in seated positions, which made height estimates more difficult and prone to error. Others, however, were laid out in ways that allowed measurements to be taken directly. A recurring pattern emerges when examining these accounts. Many of the remains were said to have been sent to museums or institutions for study. The Smithsonian Institution appears frequently in old records, often as the final destination of unusual finds. Yet when researchers today search for these specimens, the paper trail abruptly ends. No catalog entries survive. No preserved bones remain accessible. For some, this has fueled speculation that institutions suppressed anomalous evidence to maintain a consistent narrative of human evolution. The far more likely explanation is simpler. Early curation was disorganized, and fragile remains often deteriorated or were discarded due to poor storage practices. But the absence of these bones leaves questions unresolved, allowing legends to grow where evidence cannot be re-examined. In Europe, reports from earlier centuries describe similar findings. Accounts from the 18th century mention oversized tombs in France and skeletons uncovered in Carthaginian ruins that surpass normal human proportions. Some of these stories were rooted in misidentifications, particularly when animal bones were mistaken for human remains. Others echoed the same blend of legend and observation that characterized early archaeology in America. Without modern techniques to analyze DNA, bone structure, and environmental context, early researchers were left with impressions rather than conclusions. There were, however, legitimate medical explanations for a small number of individuals who reached extraordinary height. Conditions such as gigantism and acromegaly can produce extreme growth, especially when left untreated. In isolated populations or in families where genetic mutations pass through multiple generations, such individuals may have stood out dramatically. It is entirely plausible that early communities encountered people whose stature appeared supernatural. A single individual of exceptional height can create a legend that lasts for centuries, especially in societies that relied on oral storytelling to preserve history. Yet this does not fully explain the persistence of the giant motif. The number of independent reports, combined with the depth of the myths, suggests that the idea of giants was not purely symbolic. Something in the ancient world inspired these stories. Whether it was encounters with tall individuals, the discovery of abnormally large bones, or the merging of cultural memories into myth, the archaeological record hints at origins, but does not settle the question. To approach the truth, we must examine the science of human height more closely. What is the real upper limit of human growth? How rare are individuals over 7 feet tall? And could ancient environments have supported people significantly larger than those living today? To understand whether giants could have existed in any form resembling the beings described in ancient stories, we must first turn to biology. Human height is not random. It emerges from a combination of genetics, environment, nutrition, and hormonal regulation. Under normal circumstances, these factors create a predictable range for human stature, with averages varying from one population to another. Yet, history and modern medicine provide clear evidence that individuals can grow far beyond the average under specific conditions. Gigantism, caused by excessive production of growth hormone during childhood, is a well-documented medical phenomenon. Those who develop this condition often reach heights well above 7 feet, and in extreme cases, 8 feet. The tallest verified individual in modern history, Robert Wadlow, measured nearly 9 feet when he died in 1940. His height was the result of a pituitary tumor that continuously stimulated growth. Despite his immense stature, he lived within the limits of human biology. His bones, although elongated, still followed the proportions of the human skeletal system. His muscles, strained by his size, required braces for support, yet he walked, spoke, and lived as a human being coping with extraordinary physical demands. Acromegaly, which affects adults after growth plates close, thickens bones and enlarges facial features, creating the robust, heavy appearance sometimes described in myths. Individuals with this condition might not reach extreme height, but their physical presence can appear immense. If ancient people encountered such individuals, especially in isolated areas with limited medical understanding, they could easily have interpreted them as members of a distinct race, giants rather than humans with a rare hormonal disorder. But even with these conditions in mind, biology sets limits. A human skeleton is engineered to support a certain amount of mass. As height increases, weight rises dramatically. Bone density must increase to carry this load, and cardiovascular demands grow. A 10-foot human, for example, would require bone reinforcement far beyond what natural biology allows. The circulatory system would struggle to maintain blood pressure in the brain. Evolutionary biologists generally agree that the physical constraints of the human body make individuals above 9 feet extremely unlikely, without immediate medical complications or early mortality. For this reason, many historians see no biological pathway for a thriving population of giants as described in folklore, towering beings capable of battle, hunting, and survival at heights beyond the limits of human engineering. That argument, however, addresses only the largest mythical claims. It does not rule out the existence of individuals or even small groups who exceeded 7 feet in ancient times, especially in communities where selective pressures or genetic isolation shaped unique traits. Certain regions historically produced populations with unusual average height, such as the Dinka people of South Sudan, who are among the tallest in the world today. If ancient tribes encountered even a handful of individuals standing well above their own population's average, it could create a mythic impression that lasted for generations. Early humans relied on storytelling to preserve memory. A single extraordinary figure could echo across centuries, magnified through repetition until the man became a legend, and the legend became a giant. Yet biology alone cannot explain the consistency of giant narratives across global cultures. Nor does it account for the specific descriptions of enormous tools, oversized graves, or architectural features that some researchers claim were designed for individuals larger than the average human. These claims, though controversial, demand scrutiny. Were they misinterpretations, symbolic artistic expressions, or genuine reflections of people whose stature stood beyond the norm? To answer that, we must turn to anthropology and investigate the cultural and symbolic role giants played in the ancient world. Understanding why giants mattered may reveal whether they were purely metaphorical, embodiments of fear, strength, or chaos, or faint memories rooted in real encounters with humans who defied expectation. When ancient cultures described giants, they were not simply inventing fantastical beings for entertainment. Mythology served as a framework for understanding the world, a vessel for memory, and a tool for explaining forces that shaped early society. To determine whether giants were real individuals, symbolic constructs, or something in between, we must explore the stories as anthropologists do, by examining their function, consistency, and cultural context. In many societies, giants symbolized the untamed world. They represented mountains, storms, earthquakes, and the primal forces that early humans could not control. The Greeks portrayed the Gigantes as embodiments of chaos, beings whose defeat signified the establishment of order. The Norse described the Jotnar as ancient forces intertwined with nature, their size a metaphor for the overwhelming landscapes of the north. When early humans stood before mountains or glaciers, environments that dwarfed their own scale, they often personified these features as enormous beings. But symbolism alone cannot explain the level of detail in some traditions. Legends of giants frequently include specific physical descriptions: height, hair color, bone structure, and even behavioral traits. Indigenous tribes in North America preserved accounts of battles with extraordinarily tall enemies, describing their weapons, appearance, and movements with a precision uncommon in purely symbolic myth. Such details suggest that the stories may have originated from real encounters with individuals who were genuinely larger than average. Some anthropologists propose that giants served as ancestral memory. If an early tribe encountered a group of humans significantly taller than themselves, whether due to genetics, environment, or rarity, those encounters would have left a deep impression. The stories told by eyewitnesses would be repeated across generations. Over time, the memory of a tall human could become the legend of a giant race. This phenomenon, known as mythic amplification, transforms unusual events into epic narratives without entirely discarding the original truth. Evidence of this exists in cultures with well-documented encounters. The Maori of New Zealand told of the Toa Takahi, warriors of large stature who inhabited the land before their arrival. In Patagonia, early European explorers described encountering indigenous peoples of striking height, which later contributed to the myth of the Patagonian giants. In these cases, exaggeration occurred, but the root of the story was grounded in real people. Interpreting giants as symbolic or exaggerated memories seems reasonable, yet it does not address the recurring claim that ancient structures were built for beings larger than modern humans. Some researchers argue that certain doorways, stair fragments, and tool impressions appear oversized. Skeptics counter that these features often had ceremonial purposes unrelated to physical scale. Without clear evidence, neither interpretation settles the question. Mythology also hints at another function. Giants served as moral and cultural boundaries. They represented the other, a rival force that defined what it meant to be human. By confronting giants in stories, early societies articulated their values and fears. Strength, skill, cunning, and resilience gained meaning when tested against towering adversaries. In this sense, giants helped shape cultural identity. Yet, even if giants were primarily symbolic, the persistence of their image across civilizations suggests something deeper. Human imagination alone rarely produces the same idea in cultures with no connection. Shared fears might explain some of the consistency, but shared experience provides a stronger foundation. Perhaps ancient people encountered individuals who challenged their understanding of human limits. Perhaps families or tribes existed where unusual height was common enough to inspire awe. Perhaps the memory of these encounters was magnified until it crossed the threshold into myth. Anthropology allows for all these possibilities. But to move closer to the truth, we must examine the archaeological record for artifacts, structures, or remains that can be studied directly. Legends, memories, and symbols provide a starting point. Science must supply what can be measured. If giants truly existed in any form beyond occasional cases of extreme height, the material record should contain traces, large skeletal remains, tools scaled for oversized hands, dwellings with proportions too expansive for ordinary humans, or, at the very least, measurements embedded in archaeological sites that suggest inhabitants of unusual stature. The search for such evidence has captured the imagination of researchers, skeptics, and enthusiasts for centuries. Yet, it remains one of the most contentious aspects of the debate. Modern archaeology relies on rigorous methodologies. Measurements, carbon dating, anatomical comparisons, and contextual analysis are essential tools for distinguishing legitimate discoveries from misinterpretations. Throughout this process, bones are the most significant source of information. Human remains provide direct insight into height, bone density, muscle attachment, and overall structure. However, bones are also fragile, highly susceptible to decay, and easily confused with those of large animals in fragmented states. Many early giant skeleton reports from farmers and amateur diggers likely stemmed from misidentified animal bones, especially those of large mammals like bison or mastodon. Where physical remains were documented by trained archaeologists, the picture becomes more nuanced. Several excavation reports from the late 19th century describe human skeletons ranging from 6.5 to 7.5 feet tall. Impressive, but not beyond the known extremes of human variation. In some regions, particularly among the Adena people of the Ohio Valley, individuals of significant height were occasionally found, likely due to genetic factors within their population. These discoveries were notable, but they did not approach the colossal sizes described in myth. Claims of skeletons exceeding 8 feet are far rarer and often lack surviving evidence. Without bones available for modern analysis, they remain unresolved. In cases where bones were reportedly sent to institutions, poor curation practices or improper storage may explain their disappearance. Many early collections were lost to fires, relocations, or simple neglect, making it impossible to confirm the original reports. Beyond bones, some researchers point to unusually large tools discovered in various parts of the world. Oversized axes, spearheads, or stone hammers occasionally surface in excavations. These artifacts are often cited as potential evidence for giant inhabitants. Yet, closer analysis frequently reveals mundane explanations. Ritual objects were sometimes intentionally oversized for ceremonial use. Tools might have been designed for two-handed operation or for uses unrelated to physical size. Without clear wear patterns or contextual clues, their presence alone cannot confirm the existence of giant tool users. Architectural evidence is equally ambiguous. Doorways several meters tall exist in some ancient structures, but they typically served symbolic or ceremonial purposes rather than accommodating the daily passage of enormous humans. Monumental architecture often emphasizes scale to convey spiritual or political power. Large spaces do not necessarily imply large inhabitants. Temples, tombs, and pyramids are built to impress, not to reflect human proportions. Despite these limitations, there are a few intriguing anomalies that merit attention. Certain burial chambers in Europe are disproportionately large relative to their occupants, leaving open questions about their intended use. In South America, a handful of long bones discovered in remote regions have dimensions that challenge normal classification, though their origins remain disputed. These curiosities, while not conclusive, suggest the possibility of rare but exceptional individuals whose height and presence might have fueled local legends. The physical record provides only partial answers. It demonstrates that tall individuals existed in ancient times, some remarkably so, but it does not confirm the existence of a distinct race of giants. Instead, it hints at isolated cases, genetic variations, and the natural tendency of stories to expand over time. To reach a more complete understanding, we must now examine the psychological and cultural mechanisms that influence how extraordinary individuals become mythic figures, and how memory transforms into legend. Human societies have always turned remarkable individuals into stories, and stories into symbols. When an event or person stands out sharply from everyday life, the human mind magnifies it, partly out of awe, partly out of fear, and partly because narrative exaggeration helps memory survive across generations. This process explains why extraordinary height, whether rare or misunderstood, became the foundation for legends of giants across the world. Early communities were small, often made up of families or clans that rarely encountered outsiders. A single visitor, unusually tall, imposing, or physically distinctive, could alter a community's perception of what was possible. If this person displayed strength or dominance, the impression deepened. When elders retold the encounter, they preserved the shock and enlarged the details. Over time, the height might increase, the story might gain new embellishments, and the individual would be remembered not as a tall person, but as a giant. Anthropologists call this vertical amplification, a phenomenon where physical attributes are stretched across retellings until they exceed natural boundaries. Psychology shapes myth in another way as well. Humans instinctively create opposites to define themselves: gods and mortals, order and chaos, giants and ordinary people. Giants in this sense represent the extreme edge of humanity, figures that embody what is larger, stronger, or more dangerous than the human self. They become narrative tools that reinforce cultural values, illustrating the challenges a society overcame or personifying its greatest fears. A giant defeated by a hero becomes a symbol of human resilience. A giant tribe rumored to dwell beyond the hills becomes a warning to avoid dangerous territory. Cognitive patterns also influence storytelling. Humans remember the extraordinary far more easily than the mundane. Myths grow louder as they move across generations. In societies without writing, oral tradition was the only method to preserve history, and dramatic details made stories easier to recall. A hunter who encountered a tall stranger became the ancestor who battled a man twice his height. A war between tribal groups grew into an epic conflict against beings who towered above men. Each retelling shaped the next until the story solidified into legend. Yet, amplification alone does not account for the persistence of similar giant myths across distant cultures. Parallel stories suggest parallel experiences. Encounters with tall individuals might have been rare, but widespread enough for early humans everywhere to confront the same phenomenon. Genetic variation could produce pockets of unusual height in multiple regions. Environmental factors like nutrition or selective breeding could contribute, and in the absence of scientific understanding, communities interpreted what they saw through symbolic frameworks that merged reality with imagination. There is also the possibility that memories of megafauna influenced giant lore. Early humans lived alongside enormous animals, mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths. Discovering large bones without anatomical knowledge could easily lead to the assumption they belonged to giant humans. Ancient Greeks, encountering the massive skulls of prehistoric elephants, believed they had found evidence of the Cyclopes. Similar misinterpretations likely occurred around the world, reinforcing existing narratives of giants and blending them with the remains of long-extinct creatures. Ultimately, psychology explains how human memory transforms the exceptional into the legendary. But legends do not survive unless they resonate with something real. However small the original truth may have been, the belief in giants persisted because it touched a universal human experience. The encounter with something beyond ordinary scale, whether physical, emotional, or environmental. Still, none of these explanations settle the deeper question that continues to draw both scholars and enthusiasts into debate. If giants were real in any form, why did they disappear from the historical record? Did they die out naturally, blend into other populations, or never exist as a distinct group at all? To approach this final question, we must examine evolution, migration, and the pressures that shape the survival, or extinction, of unusual human traits. If individuals of exceptional height once lived among ancient populations, the question becomes, what happened to them? Evolution favors traits that improve survival and reproduction. Extreme height, while visually impressive, comes with biological challenges that may have prevented it from becoming widespread or stable across generations. To understand why legends of giants seem to fade as civilizations evolve, we must look at the forces that shape human survival. In evolutionary terms, height has a point at which advantages turn into liabilities. Moderately tall individuals often benefit from increased reach, strength, and presence. These advantages may have helped certain groups gain social status, attract mates, or succeed in conflict. But beyond a certain threshold, extreme height imposes severe costs. The skeleton must sustain immense weight, the heart must pump blood over long distances, and joints endure stresses far beyond what they were designed for. Without medical care, individuals over 7 feet face a greater risk of fractures, cardiovascular problems, and early mortality. These biological realities mean that even if rare giants appeared within early populations, their chances of living long enough to reproduce consistently were significantly lower. Migration patterns also played a role. Early humans moved through harsh environments, crossing mountains, deserts, and dense forests. Survival demanded agility, endurance, and efficient energy use. Extraordinary height, while intimidating, is less suited to navigating rugged terrain or enduring long travel. Populations that relied on mobility could not support individuals whose physical needs outstripped available resources. In isolated communities, such individuals may have existed, but they were unlikely to form large groups or sustain lineages. Cultural factors further shaped the fate of unusually tall individuals. In some societies, height was celebrated and associated with leadership or spiritual power. In others, those who differed physically from the norm faced suspicion or exclusion. Ritual accounts from ancient cultures sometimes depict unusually tall individuals as outsiders or threats. If such people existed, they may have been isolated rather than integrated into familial networks, reducing their long-term impact on the gene pool. As human societies advanced, the narratives surrounding giants shifted from living memory to myth. Written language replaced oral tradition. Scientific understanding replaced symbolic interpretation. Events that once inspired awe became stories filtered through generations. The more distant the original truth became, the more the legend grew. Giants moved from history to mythology, from eyewitness accounts to cultural archetypes. Yet the disappearance of giants from the biological record does not mean the traits that inspired their legends vanished entirely. Tall individuals continue to exist today, some reaching extraordinary heights due to genetic mutations or hormonal imbalances. These modern cases echo the past, rare, striking, and often accompanied by significant health challenges. They offer a glimpse into what early humans might have witnessed, individuals whose appearance blurred the line between human and mythic. Evolution rarely preserves extremes. It favors stability, adaptability, and endurance. Extraordinary height fails on all three counts. If ancient giants existed, even in small numbers, they would have struggled to survive without the medical knowledge we have today. Their remains, fragile and rare, would have been easily lost to time. Their stories, however, endured, carried by the people who saw them, remembered them, and transformed them into the giants of legend. What remains now is the final question, the one that drives both skeptics and believers. If the physical evidence is incomplete, the biological possibilities limited, and the stories amplified, then what is the true origin of the giant myth? Does it point to actual encounters with rare individuals, or does it reflect something deeper about humanity's perception of power, fear, and the unknown? To reach the conclusion, we must bring together history, science, archaeology, and myth to determine whether the idea of giants is ultimately truth, metaphor, or a fusion of both. To reach a meaningful conclusion about giants in history, we must step back and examine all the evidence together. When viewed in isolation, each component, mythic stories, archaeological claims, biological extremes, cultural memories, reveals only a fragment of the picture. But when brought into alignment, a more coherent narrative begins to emerge, one that neither fully endorses nor fully dismisses the idea of giants. The first layer lies in the myths themselves. Across continents and civilizations, stories of giants appear with remarkable consistency. This does not prove that a separate race of giants existed, but it does suggest that ancient people witnessed something extraordinary enough to imprint itself across cultures. Myths tend to exaggerate, but exaggeration is rooted in perception. If early communities encountered individuals or groups who were significantly taller than themselves, even by a few inches, these differences could have expanded into legends over time. Human imagination stretches reality, but it rarely invents without inspiration. The second layer involves the archaeological record. While no scientifically verified skeletons of extreme size have been preserved, historical documents contain scattered references to unusually tall individuals. Some reports were misidentified animal bones. Others were the product of sensational journalism, but a few came from credible sources. These cases likely represent outliers, rare but real examples of humans who reached exceptional height due to genetic mutations or environmental factors. They do not establish the existence of a giant race, but they demonstrate that extraordinary height has appeared throughout human history. The third layer is biology. Human genetics occasionally produces individuals far outside the normal range of height. Conditions such as gigantism and acromegaly have existed for as long as humans have had hormones and pituitary glands. In ancient times, without medical intervention, such individuals may have grown until their bodies could no longer sustain them. Their brief lives would have been dramatic, memorable, and easily transformed into myth. Biological science confirms that humans can grow extremely tall, but also confirms that survival at such heights is difficult and rarely sustained across generations. The fourth layer comes from anthropology and psychology. Giants occupy a powerful symbolic place in human storytelling. They represent everything that stands beyond ordinary experience: power, chaos, danger, the unknown. They give form to the fears and aspirations of early societies. They provide the backdrop for epic struggles that establish cultural identity. Even if giants began as memories of tall individuals, the symbolic evolution of those memories transformed them into archetypes. When these layers overlap, a pattern emerges. Giants in history are unlikely to have been members of a separate species or long-lived race. The lack of physical evidence and the constraints of biology support this conclusion. Yet the consistency and detail of giant myths worldwide suggests that the stories are not purely fictional. They likely originated from encounters with rare but real individuals whose extraordinary height made a profound impact on early societies. Over generations, those memories were amplified, dramatized, and woven into religious, cultural, and mythological contexts. This blending of truth and metaphor is common in ancient storytelling. Heroes, gods, monsters, and supernatural beings often reflect natural phenomena interpreted through the lens of human experience. Giants fit within this tradition, figures born from real encounters shaped by psychological needs and preserved by myth until they became larger than life. The final question, then, is not whether giants existed exactly as described in ancient stories. Rather, it is this: why did the idea of giants matter so deeply to so many civilizations? What did these beings represent? And why do they still fascinate us today? To answer that, we must turn to the symbolic role giants play in human culture and what they reveal about humanity's relationship with power, fear, and the boundaries of the possible. Giants endure in human imagination not because they were common, nor because they left behind cities or empires, but because they embody something universal. They stand at the boundary between the possible and the impossible, the known and the unknown, the human and the superhuman. Whether or not a race of giants ever walked the earth, the idea of giants reveals profound truths about the people who created these stories and the worlds they lived in. For early humans, the world was enormous and unpredictable. Mountains towered above them. Storms shattered their shelters. Animals roamed the earth whose size and power dwarfed anything humanity could muster. In this environment, giants were not simply large humans, they were metaphors for the scale of nature itself. A giant represented an obstacle so great that only courage, cleverness, or divine intervention could overcome it. In this sense, giants helped communities articulate the challenges they faced and the values they upheld. At the same time, giants reflect humanity's fascination with physical extremes. Height has always been associated with strength, authority, and dominance. A leader who stood a few inches taller than his peers could appear twice as commanding in the eyes of followers. When a truly tall individual emerged, someone whose presence overwhelmed those around him, the impression would linger. Stories grow around such figures because they capture the imagination and because they challenge assumptions about what humans can be. Giants also serve as a powerful narrative device. In myths and epics, they appear as obstacles to be overcome, forces of chaos to be defeated, or embodiments of ancient knowledge. They allow storytellers to explore themes of conflict, ambition, heroism, and the triumph of order over disorder. These themes resonate across cultures because they mirror the struggles inherent in human life. The giants we face may not be flesh and bone, but they take shape in the stories we tell about adversity, temptation, or fear. There is another reason giants persist. They allow humans to explore the unknown edges of their own history. Every civilization wonders where it came from and what ancient secrets lie buried beneath its foundations. Stories of giants hint at a world older, stranger, and more complex than the one described in textbooks. They invite speculation, curiosity, and the sense that history holds mysteries we have not yet uncovered. Giants stand as symbols of forgotten chapters and unexplored possibilities. In modern times, giants continue to capture attention for different reasons. Advances in science reveal the extraordinary capabilities of the human body, while genetics and medicine help explain the rare conditions that produce extreme height. We now understand the mechanisms behind gigantism, yet the stories of giants still resonate because they offer something science cannot provide: meaning. They help us imagine the extraordinary within the ordinary, the exceptional within the familiar. Ultimately, the legend of giants is neither pure fact nor pure fiction. It is a reflection of humanity's deepest instincts, to exaggerate, to memorialize, to explain, and to dream. The stories remind us that history is shaped not only by what happened, but by how people understood and retold what they believed happened. Giants are windows into ancient fears, ancient encounters, and ancient imaginations. In the end, giants endure because they speak to a fundamental truth about humanity. We are drawn to the edges of our own limits. We seek to understand what lies beyond the horizon of possibility. The question, did giants exist, holds power not because of its answer, but because of what it reveals about us. It shows our fascination with the extraordinary, our desire to connect with ancient worlds, and our willingness to imagine a reality larger than our own. If giants never existed, they remain one of humanity's most compelling creations. If they did exist, even in fleeting and imperfect forms, their presence shaped the stories that shaped civilization itself. Either way, the legend of giants reminds us that the line between history and myth is often thin, and that the truth of the past is rarely simple. The search for giants leads us into a landscape where myth, memory, and science intersect. Ancient texts describe towering beings with a clarity that suggests more than imagination. Archaeological reports hint at individuals whose height exceeded the ordinary, though none form a pattern strong enough to declare a lost race. Biology confirms that exceptional height is possible, yet also rare and unsustainable across generations. Anthropology reveals how stories grow into symbols, and symbols become the legends that guide civilizations. When all the evidence is placed side by side, a picture emerges, not of monsters roaming the earth, but of extraordinary humans whose lives left an impression too large to disappear. Their height, their presence, or the awe they inspired became the spark that ignited centuries of storytelling. What began as encounters with rare individuals evolved into myths that crossed oceans and outlived empires. Giants, then, are not simply relics of fantasy. They are reflections of humanity's desire to understand the extraordinary. They remind us that early people struggled to explain the unusual with the tools they had, turning lived experience into stories that carried meaning long after the facts faded. They also remind us that history holds unanswered questions, and that the boundary between truth and legend is often far more fluid than we assume. Whether giants once stood among ancient societies or whether they live only in the imagination, their legacy endures. They challenge us to look deeper into our past, to question our assumptions, and to remember that humanity's story is filled with mysteries still waiting to be explored. And in that sense, the legend of giants is not a closed chapter, but an open door, inviting us to keep searching, keep questioning, and keep wondering what wonders the ancient world has yet to reveal.